Richard Gerald Jordan, 49 years on death row at Mississippi State Penitentiary. On June 25, 2025, at precisely 6 o'clock in the evening, Richard Gerald Jordan lay strapped to a gurney at Mississippi State Penitentiary. At 79 years old, he had just become the oldest person executed in Mississippi's history. But here's what makes this case extraordinary. Jordan had been waiting for this moment for 49 years, longer than any death row inmate in the state's history. 49 years. Think about that. 49 years of appeals, retrials, legal battles, and waiting. For separate juries sentenced him to death. 4 times. And yet, the execution almost didn't happen at all. What Jordan did in January 1976 was undeniably horrific, but what happened afterward revealed cracks in America's justice system that are still splitting wider today. The victim was a 34-year-old mother of 2 who opened her door to what she thought was an electrician. Her 3-year-old son was sleeping inside when she vanished. The crime was calculated, cold, and devastating. But the man who committed it was also a decorated Vietnam veteran with severe PTSD, a diagnosis his jury never heard. This is a story about more than one crime. It's about what war does to a person's mind, what 5 decades on death row does to everyone involved, and whether justice delayed is justice at all. But to understand how it came to this, we need to go back to where it all started. This video discusses a real criminal case involving violence and contains mature themes. It's intended for educational purposes and to examine the criminal justice system. Viewer discretion is advised. Richard Gerald Jordan was born on May 25, 1946, in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He grew up in the nearby town of Petal, where neighbors would later describe him as having a reputation as a good person throughout his school years. He came from a devout, church-going family. By all accounts, he was just another Southern kid with an ordinary life ahead of him. Then came Vietnam. Right out of Petal High School, Jordan faced charges for check forgery. Rather than go to court, he made a deal that was common in those days. Join the military and the charges would disappear. In the mid-1960s, this was how America filled its draft quotas. Jordan agreed. He was 18 years old when he landed in Vietnam in 1966. What happened next would define the rest of his life. According to court records, Jordan served 3 tours of duty totaling 33 months in combat. He wasn't stationed at some safe base miles from action. He volunteered for one of the most dangerous jobs in the war, helicopter door gunner with the 1st Cavalry Division. Imagine this, you're 19 years old, standing in the open cargo door of a Huey helicopter, holding an M60 machine gun as tracers streak past your head. You're providing suppressive fire to protect troops below while the enemy shoots at your aircraft. One wrong move, one unlucky bullet, and you're done. Jordan earned the Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal and the Air Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters, decorations that document extensive combat flight time. He received 5 air medals in total. These weren't participation trophies. They were evidence of a young man who repeatedly flew into hell. But here's the detail that makes this even more tragic. Jordan stayed in Vietnam longer than required so his younger brother could come home. He volunteered to let his sibling return safely while he remained in the combat zone. The war changed him. How could it not? But in 1970, while still in the military, Jordan was court-martialed for falsifying official documents. He spent 9 months in the U.S. disciplinary barracks at Fort Leavenworth. After his eventual discharge, Jordan tried to rebuild. He got married and had 3 children. He worked at a fertilizer plant in Louisiana for a year, then spent a few months in a Morgan City shipyard. His wife stayed in Hattiesburg with their kids while he worked across state lines. By early 1976, Jordan was 30 years old, unemployed, and according to his later clemency petition, desperate. He'd had a job lined up in Louisiana and had moved his family there, only to discover the position had been filled. He looked for work for a few days. What he found instead was a darker solution to his money problems. Looking back, there were signs no one noticed. The court-martial, the job instability, the separation from his family, the invisible wounds from Vietnam that nobody understood in 1976. Everything changed on January 12, 1976. Jordan had a plan, and it was methodical. He needed money fast, enough to start over. His solution was kidnapping for ransom, targeting someone wealthy enough to pay. But he wasn't going after just anyone. He was going after someone connected to a bank. On that January morning, Jordan drove from Louisiana to Gulfport, Mississippi. Before leaving, he'd stopped at a pawn shop in Baton Rouge and traded his 16-gauge shotgun for a .38 caliber pistol. Think about that exchange for a moment. He knew what he was about to do required a different weapon. In Gulfport, Jordan called the Gulf National Bank. According to court documents, he asked to speak with someone about applying for a loan. The receptionist told him Charles Marter, the commercial loan officer, could help him. Jordan thanked her and hung up. He never intended to apply for a loan. He just needed a name. Next, he opened a telephone book, remember, this was 1976, and found the Marta's home address. It was that simple. No background check, no security system to worry about. Just a name in a phone book, and Jordan knew exactly where Charles Marter's family lived. At the Marter home in Mississippi City, Edwina Marter was there with her 3-year-old son, Kevin. Her older son, Eric, age 10, was at school. According to court records, Jordan arrived at the house posing as an electrician. When Edwina opened the door, she found herself looking at a man with a gun. Jordan forced her into a vehicle at gunpoint. Little Kevin, thankfully, slept through the abduction. He would wake up later to find his mother gone and would spend the rest of his life with almost no memories of her. They didn't know it yet, but Edwina Marter's fate was likely sealed the moment she got into that car. Jordan drove her approximately 35 miles north to a remote section of the DeSoto National Forest. It's dense woodland there, the kind of place where you could scream and no one would hear you. The kind of place where no one would find you for days. What happened next is where the prosecution and defense accounts diverged, though the outcome was tragically the same. Prosecutors claimed Jordan forced Edwina to kneel and executed her, a single gunshot to the back of the head. Jordan's version was different. He claimed she tried to run, and he fired what he intended as a warning shot. The bullet struck her in the back of the head, killing her. The medical examiner's report and the trajectory of the wound supported the prosecution's theory. This was an execution, not a warning shot gone wrong. This was, as they would describe it in court, cold and calculated murder. But here's where Jordan's plan completely fell apart. After killing Edwina Marter, he called her husband, Charles. According to court testimony, Jordan told Charles that his wife was safe. He demanded $25,000 in ransom for her return. Imagine being Charles Marter in that moment. Your wife is missing, a stranger calls demanding money, claiming she's alive and will be returned unharmed. You have no idea she's already dead in a forest. You have no idea your 3-year-old son is alone at home, confused and frightened. You have no idea your life has just been destroyed. By the time authorities arrived, it was too late for Edwina. But Jordan's criminal career was about to be very short. He was arrested the next day at a hotel in Mobile, Alabama. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He'd left a trail a rookie detective could follow. By January 13, 1976, the situation had spiraled completely out of control, for Jordan, for the Marter family, and for everyone touched by this senseless crime. The investigation was swift because Jordan had made critical mistakes. When police located him in Mobile, they found evidence connecting him to both the kidnapping and the murder. There was no mystery about who committed this crime. Jordan confessed. But what seemed like an open-and-shut case would become one of the longest-running legal sagas in Mississippi history. The reason had nothing to do with Jordan's guilt. He never seriously disputed what he'd done. The reason was about how to punish him. In July 1976, just 6 months after the murder, Richard Jordan went to trial. According to court records, the jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on capital murder charges. When the trial judge asked Jordan if he wished to address the court before sentencing, Jordan declined to speak. At that time, Mississippi law mandated an automatic death sentence for capital murder convictions. There was no separate sentencing hearing, no opportunity for the defense to present mitigating factors. If you were convicted of capital murder, you got death. Period. The judge had no choice. Jordan was sentenced to die in Mississippi's gas chamber. But there was a problem brewing. A case was already before the Mississippi Supreme Court challenging the constitutionality of automatic death sentences. District Attorney Albert Necase and Assistant District Attorney Joe Sam Owen knew this ruling was coming, and they anticipated it would invalidate Jordan's sentence. They considered requesting a trial with a separate punishment hearing, but they couldn't find any basis in Mississippi law for such a motion. Later that year, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in cases from North Carolina and Louisiana that automatic death sentences constituted cruel and unusual punishment. Jordan's conviction stood, but his sentence was vacated. He would need a new sentencing hearing. In 1977, Jordan was sentenced to death for the second time. But this sentence was also overturned on appeal due to unconstitutional penalty phase instructions. In 1983, he received his third death sentence. Once again, it was later vacated by the U.S. Supreme Court. Police said Jordan murdered Edwina Marter in cold blood. Jordan's attorneys claimed his Vietnam trauma played a role. But here's what his jury never heard. Jordan had served 33 months of combat, suffered from severe PTSD, and had never received proper mental health treatment. According to his later attorney, Chrissy Nobile, he was never given access to an independent mental health professional who could assist his defense during the penalty phase. By the early 1990s, after 3 death sentences had been overturned, Jordan made a deal with prosecutors. He would accept a life sentence without the possibility of parole in exchange for dropping his appeals. Both sides agreed. Case closed. Except it wasn't. In 1994, Jordan violated the plea agreement by filing an appeal challenging the life without parole sentence itself. His argument was technical but clever. Life imprisonment without parole wasn't a permitted sentence in Mississippi in 1976 when the crime occurred. He asked courts to reduce his sentence to life with the possibility of parole, which had been available back then. The Mississippi Supreme Court was not amused. They invalidated the plea agreement, ruling it shouldn't have been an option in the first place. Jordan went back to court for a 4th trial. In 1998, 22 years after the murder, a jury sentenced him to death for the 4th time. This time, the sentence stuck. But the story doesn't end there. Richard Jordan's life at Mississippi State Penitentiary at Parchman became a strange existence suspended between life and death. For 27 years after his final death sentence, Jordan lived on death row while legal challenges over execution methods kept preventing his execution date. Mississippi's death penalty system itself was in flux. Jordan was initially sentenced to die in the gas chamber, but after the controversial 1983 execution of Jimmy Lee Gray, which witnesses described as horrific and prolonged, the state began transitioning to lethal injection. However, death row inmates sentenced before 1984 were still legally supposed to be executed by gas until 1998. Mississippi didn't even begin conducting lethal injections until 2002. Then came the drug shortage. Pharmaceutical companies stopped providing the drugs traditionally used in executions. European manufacturers refused to sell to American prisons. By 2012, Mississippi, like many states, had effectively run out of pentobarbital and couldn't obtain sodium thiopental either. Executions ground to a halt. Jordan became the lead plaintiff in a federal lawsuit challenging Mississippi's 3-drug lethal injection protocol. He and other inmates argued that midazolam, the sedative the state wanted to use as a replacement, created substantial risk that prisoners would remain conscious and experience excruciating pain when the other 2 drugs, a paralytic and a cardiac arrest agent, were administered. So what does a man do for 49 years on death row? According to those who knew him, Jordan transformed himself. He earned tier worker status, a position of trust given to inmates who maintain excellent behavior and have no disciplinary violations for extended periods. Prison officials considered him such a model inmate that Commissioner Burl Cain allowed Jordan to marry at Parchman after he reconnected with a childhood friend and fell in love. His wife, Marcia, would be with him until his final moments. Jordan became a mentor to younger inmates. He was known for defusing conflicts, for offering counsel, for trying to prevent others from making the mistakes he'd made. He described himself as living by the principle that you cannot have both love and hate in your heart at the same time. He wrote. He created inventions. He found deep faith and spent his final days drawing comfort from 1 Corinthians 13, the biblical passage about love. According to his attorney Clemency, Jordan spent every day trying to make up for his crime. He sought only to help others. Psychologically, the impact of nearly 5 decades on death row is almost impossible to comprehend. Jordan knew that one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe next year, the state would kill him. He watched other inmates come and go. He aged from a 30-year-old man to a 79-year-old elder. He saw his children grow up through prison visits, unable to be there for them. He missed graduations, weddings, the births of grandchildren. The survival tactics were mental. Jordan maintained routine. He stayed busy. He built relationships. He held on to hope through multiple appeals even as each one failed. Prison officials noted that in the days before his execution, he seemed in a good mood, sharing memories from his past, telling stories. Meanwhile, the Marter family was experiencing its own form of imprisonment. Edwina's sons, Eric and Kevin, grew up without their mother. Eric was 11 when she died, old enough to have some memories but young enough that they've faded. Kevin was 3. He has no memories of her at all. Eric Marter would later tell reporters he didn't buy Jordan's claims about PTSD affecting the crime. He saw it as playing the military card. He pointed to how meticulously planned the kidnapping was. The family never forgave Jordan, and they struggled with watching him file appeal after appeal, stretching out the process for decades. But redemption or decline? That depends on who you ask. His attorneys saw a man genuinely transformed by remorse. The Marter family saw a man desperately manipulating the system to avoid facing justice. Both could be true. After 49 years on death row, something unexpected happened. The courts finally ran out of reasons to delay. In early 2025, the legal avenues began closing. On June 16, law professor Franklin Rosenblatt filed a clemency petition with Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves. The petition emphasized Jordan's Vietnam service, his undiagnosed and untreated PTSD, and his exemplary behavior over nearly 50 years in prison. It included letters from supporters describing him as a patriot, a man of faith, and someone who had spent decades trying to atone. Rosenblatt argued that modern understanding of combat trauma would have changed the outcome of Jordan's trial. His war service, his war trauma, was considered not relevant in his murder trial, Rosenblatt said. We just know so much more than we did 10 years ago, and certainly during Vietnam, about the effect of war trauma on the brain and how that affects ongoing behaviors. Clemency, Jordan's attorney, pressed the argument that his constitutional rights had been violated. He was never given what for a long time the law has entitled him to, which is a mental health professional that is independent of the prosecution and can assist his defense, she explained. Because of that, his jury never got to hear about his Vietnam experiences. Organizations including Death Penalty Action and Catholic Mobilizing Network circulated petitions calling for clemency, gathering thousands of signatures. They delivered them to the governor's office on Tuesday, June 24, 2025. That same evening, Governor Reeves reviewed the petition and announced his decision. He would not intervene. In a statement posted to social media, Reeves wrote that he'd considered the circumstances of the crime, Jordan's admission of guilt, and the multiple trials and appeals. His conclusion was blunt: justice must be done, and in Mississippi, justice will be done. On June 23, the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals denied Jordan's request for a stay of execution. On June 25, just hours before the scheduled execution time, the U.S. Supreme Court denied Jordan's final appeals without comment. 3 separate emergency applications were rejected. U.S. District Judge Henry Wingate did order one safeguard. If the first drug in the 3-drug protocol didn't render Jordan unconscious within 4 minutes, the Mississippi Department of Corrections had to consult the court before proceeding. It was a small acknowledgement of the concerns about midazolam's effectiveness. An execution vigil organized by Death Penalty Action took place outside Parchman at 5 o'clock that evening. Protesters held signs and prayed for Jordan's sentence to be commuted to life imprisonment. Inside the prison, Jordan was described as calm. He visited with his wife, Marcia, his attorneys, and his spiritual advisor, Reverend Tim Murphy. He ate his last meal at 4 in the afternoon: chicken tenders, French fries, strawberry ice cream, and a root beer float. Prison officials said he shared memories and seemed at peace. At 6 o'clock, Jordan was led into the execution chamber and strapped to a gurney. 7 media witnesses were present. His wife, his attorney, and Reverend Murphy watched from the witness room. Several members of Edwina Marter's family were also in attendance, finally there to see justice carried out after 49 years of waiting. When asked for his last words, Richard Gerald Jordan spoke clearly. "First, I would like to thank everyone for a humane way of doing this. I want to apologize to the victim's family." He thanked his lawyers and told his wife he loved her. His final words were, "I will see you on the other side, all of you." The executioner began the protocol. Jordan took several deep breaths, his mouth slightly open. Within minutes, he became still. An unnamed prison official confirmed Jordan was unconscious. The paralytic and cardiac arrest drugs were administered. At 6:16 p.m., Richard Gerald Jordan was pronounced dead. To this day, the question remains, should Vietnam trauma have spared him? The jury never heard evidence about his 33 months in combat, his PTSD, or the inadequate mental health care available to veterans in the 1970s. Would it have mattered? After the execution, Keith DeGruy, Edwina Marter's nephew, read statements on behalf of the family. Charles Marter and his sons Eric and Kevin had chosen not to attend but sent their words. "Nothing will bring back our mom, sister, aunt, and friend," DeGruy read. "Nothing can ever change what Jordan took from us 49 years ago. Jordan tried desperately to change his ruling so he can simply die in prison. We never had an option." Eric Marter, now 59 years old, had told reporters beforehand, "It should have happened a long time ago. I'm not really interested in giving him the benefit of the doubt." He and Kevin were now older than their mother had ever been. Where are they now? The Marter sons live with children and grandchildren Edwina never met. They've built lives shaped by an absence that never healed. Eric Marter has only a few photos of his mother, one possibly from her high school senior year. He knows stories other family members have shared, like how Edwina and her sister used to dress up and crash wedding receptions for fun. "She liked to have fun," he said. Richard Jordan's legacy is more complicated. His wife mourned him. His attorneys described him as remarkable, a Vietnam veteran, a pilot, a writer, an inventor, a mentor. Commissioner Burl Cain said he was glad Jordan's final hours were comfortable, that his death appeared painless, and that Jordan had shown genuine remorse. The legal case continues even after Jordan's death. The lawsuit challenging Mississippi's lethal injection protocol remains active, with other death row inmates as plaintiffs. 36 people remain on Mississippi's death row as of June 2025. The state's attorney general is seeking execution dates for 3 more. This case reveals a collision of American institutions: the military that sent young men to war, the mental health system that failed to treat them when they returned, the criminal justice system that sentenced a man to death 4 times, and the death penalty apparatus that took nearly 50 years to carry out that sentence. Here's what we're left with: a 34-year-old woman who went to answer her door and never came home. 2 boys who grew up without their mother. A Vietnam veteran whose mind was broken by war and who made a devastating choice that destroyed multiple families, including his own. And a justice system that everyone agrees failed. Whether it failed by taking too long, by ignoring mental health, by relying on an inhumane execution method, or by killing Jordan at all. Richard Gerald Jordan was one of only 22 people nationwide still on death row for crimes committed in the 1970s. His execution made him the longest-serving death row inmate to ever have his sentence carried out in Mississippi history. At 79, he was the oldest man executed in the United States since 83-year-old Walter Leroy Moody Jr. in Alabama in 2018. Mississippi has executed only 3 people in the last 10 years. The state that once led the nation in lynchings now carries out capital punishment rarely and reluctantly, often waiting decades between executions as legal challenges and drug shortages create de facto moratoriums. The lessons here are uncomfortable. We've learned an enormous amount about PTSD since 1976, about how combat trauma literally changes brain chemistry and decision-making. Modern juries hear this evidence routinely. Jordan's juries never did. Does that mean he should have lived? Or does it mean his crime was so calculated that trauma can't excuse it? We've also learned that death row creates its own trauma. 49 years of waiting for execution is torture in its own way. Ask any death penalty opponent. But ask the Marter family if they think Jordan suffered enough, and you'll get a very different answer. They waited 49 years too. The final fate: Edwina Marter's sons are now in their 50s, dealing with the cascading effects of their mother's murder on their own children and grandchildren. Richard Jordan is dead, executed on his 79th birthday. Charles Marter passed away without seeing the execution he waited decades for. He died before 2025. The system that sentenced Jordan 4 times, reversed 3 of those sentences, and finally killed him on the 4th attempt continues largely unchanged. Here's one last haunting detail. When Jordan was arrested in Mobile in January 1976, he could have been sentenced to life in prison. Mississippi had that option. If that had happened, he'd likely have been released on parole by the 1990s or early 2000s. Instead, the pursuit of death delayed everything, created decades of appeals, cost millions in legal fees, and resulted in executing a 79-year-old man with a clean prison record. The question we're left with is this: in a case where everyone agrees something went terribly wrong, can anyone truly say justice was served? Mississippi State Penitentiary still houses 36 men on death row. Some have been there for decades. Some will die of old age before they reach an execution chamber. The grinding slowness of capital punishment in America means that the death penalty has become something stranger than its supporters or opponents intended. A life sentence with a constant threat of death, stretching on until everyone involved has aged beyond recognition. This channel covers the cases the system wants you to forget. Cases that expose failures, that ask hard questions, that have no easy answers. Richard Gerald Jordan's case is exactly that kind of story. If you want more deep dives into cases that challenge what we think we know about justice, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Next week, we're covering another death row case that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about guilt and innocence. Because the truth is rarely simple. And justice? Sometimes justice is just what we call revenge when we wait long enough to carry it out.